everybody. My name is Professor Lachlan. I'm from the University of Greenwich in London, and I shan't be speaking Portuguese. Okay, my apologies, but there are good reasons for that, your pain being amongst them. So, I'm just going to talk briefly about creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship, the rationale for why we're interested in these areas, and what it is that brings us into this space. And to some extent this is about the way in which we introduce these concepts for the students who will be coming onto the pilot courses. So bear with me, many of you may well all be experienced entrepreneurs and may find some of this more trivial. However, brilliant. So the starting point is, what do we mean by creative? There's a terrible tendency for people to believe that creativity resides in the heart of the artist. Creativity is art, or sculpture, or some aesthetic pursuit that fundamentally means that for the vast majority of us, we are not creative, we are not naturally creatives. It's really these chosen few. And that's a fairly widely held view. And I've been working in creativity for 25 years, and I keep on hitting this particular bundle. It's brilliant. But there's also films, film creative. Clearly it's creative. There are wonderful people there. They create these wonderful constructs. But then we have technology. And here is an early technology, quite an important one. Anybody know what it is?
It's the steam.
It's the rocket, yes. The world's first steam locomotive. Yeah? Well done, Barry, you recognise it. But that's completely creative, is it not? That didn't exist before. It didn't have an instance until such time as that was actually invented. But that wasn't done as an artistic piece of work. It wasn't created so you just look at it. It had a function. Yes, Barry. Architecture and design. Is that creative? The things we live in. In Lisbon, that's particularly important. Buildings that don't fall down. Anybody know what this is? This is the world's first ever suspension bridge. It made the possibility to cross much, much larger areas, open land, without putting pillars down into the, well, as the viaducts. It was the thing that enabled us to cross major river basins, etc. Right? And that's the Clifton Suspension Bridge. It's between England and Wales in the UK. And then, of course, we've got space. The final frontier. So brilliant. So obviously that's not creative at all, is it? It's just engineering. Engineering can't be creative. That's mucky fingers. And actually, the most creative things we do for the last 500 years are in science and engineering. It's not art. Art is a reflection, an aesthetic, whatever. It is creative. But fundamentally, the things that have changed our world are the things that have been created by technologists, by scientists, by engineers. Yes, Bertie. So what are creative people like? Do any of you recognise any of these people? The clue may have been in what you've just seen. Guy at the end? Vincent van Gogh. Yes. Self-mutilator and artist. Next guy? Quentin Tarantino. Yeah, you're good. Okay, who's this guy then?
The Pope?
The Pope.
No.
Sorry?
Thomas Edison? No.
No. The clue was in the previous question. That's the man who built the rocket. That's George Stephenson.
Oh.
The man who created modern train transport. Oh. And this guy? Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I think it's Isambard Kingdom Brunner.
You are spot on. Well done, that man. Isambard Kingdom Brunner pretty much invented what we think of as mechanical engineering. He created the world's first suspension bridge. He created the world's first metal steamship. He created the large-scale link models that we use for chains, etc. Modern shipping, bridges, the works. One of the most important people in the history of engineering. And completely crazy. Another key feature when we're talking about new ideas and so forth. Oh, and this bunch, you heard of them? They did some stuff as well. Actually, they're quite good. We probably want to think that they're a bit creative. Yes, Barry. So then we think about innovators. Now, we've had a really interesting discussion, or fight as it's otherwise known, in the last couple of days about the concept of an innovator, as opposed to somebody who's doing something that's completely novel. Innovators are people who utilize new ideas or create new instances of things that are not necessarily brand new, but they innovate, they cause change. Inventors create things which are brand new, which did not exist before. But it's particularly important when we think about this, because the guy here is a wonderful innovator, but he certainly didn't invent anything. Because he became very rich and famous by doing what? You must know who he is, come on. No? No?
Take the
No,
glass.
no. He's called Sergey Brin. He's wearing a Google glass, because he is Google, along with Larry Page. And Sergey Brin and Larry Page, apart from having the world's most well-funded startup of all time, start a business of $4 billion, you're pretty much okay. They created the Google search engine. They did not invent search engines. It wasn't the first, in fact it wasn't the best. Lycos was much faster at the time when Google came out. But it did come out of Stanford and it was incredibly well funded. And you know, one of these things, sometimes it's the way you sell yourself that wins. And Google are very, very good at selling themselves. The chocolate factory works. So that's Sergey. He is now the world's 9th richest man. Okay, but he's an innovator. They didn't invent it. You know this lady? She should be important to the ladies in the room, certainly. Her name's Anita Borg. She created this, originally a software engineer, she created the Anita Borg Foundation, which funds huge amounts of endeavour on encouraging and developing the careers of women in science and engineering worldwide. International competitions, financial support, etc. She's had a very big impact on promoting female careers. She should have been around when this lady was around. I don't expect you to know who this is, but anybody want to have a go? She's called Rosalind Franklin. One of the cleverest ladies that's ever existed, and one of the most tragic stories. Rosalind Franklin is the lady who actually sequenced DNA. Crick and Watson stole her research, and she died of cancer shortly after they got the Nobel Prize. So like I said, she needed Anita Borg around at the time to protect her. But the point about this is that these are people who made things happen. Crick and Watson didn't solve the problem, they just saw the opportunity and grabbed the stuff she'd done. How about this guy? You're innovators? This is a straightforward, he's an engineer, he's American. He did something that has impacted on every single one of you, probably every day of your lives. And it's in his hand now. His name's Doug Engelbart. That's the very first mouse. He invented the mouse. And here's a local one. Any takers? Do you know who this gentleman is? This is Jacob Pereira. Portuguese, the man who invented sign language. Developed the world's first universally used sign language for the deaf. He didn't invent the sign language itself, that had already started, but he was the man who improved it and developed it and made it something that became worldwide used. So these are innovators. Yes, please. How about entrepreneurs? How many of you are entrepreneurs? Thank you. One. Nobody else has any entrepreneurial spirit, so this is slightly worrying. Yeah, go back. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So here we have some rather well-known people. These are entrepreneurs, okay? And they are entrepreneurs, or we deem them as such because they have successfully created organizations, businesses, on a worldwide stage or local stage or whatever, but actually take new ideas and push them forward, innovate, or in some cases annul. So this guy I think you probably know. Okay, so you know who Bill Gates is. He is the world's richest man for the last 15 years, currently worth $76 billion. It's a tough life. Did Bill Gates invent anything?
How to steal?
No.
No. He stole an existing operating system called CPM Plus and sold it to IBM as the Microsoft disk operating system. They made the only changes they made to the operating system were the titles. They even kept the same file names and daemon names within the system. But as a result, they became the world's most successful company and overtook IBM within 10 years.
Windows.
He invented Windows? Well, so given the fact that Apple tried to sue him for it, and then we're told that no, actually, Xerox developed what was called the WIMP interface, Windows interface, icons, menus, and pointing, I don't think he did.
He invented cheap OSs.
He invented
Cheap OSs.
cheap OSs.
That's for me and you.
The thing he did, above all else, is he's a smart and canny businessman. What he did was he actually changed the marketing model for software. So he changed, particularly at one point when Microsoft Office cost about $4,000 per unit to actually stick on your machine, so most people couldn't afford it. He actually then unbundled it, sold all the units individually and sold them $100 a piece, and all of a sudden he opened a whole market in Office. That was brilliant. Okay, that's Bill. He's done pretty well. Here's a lady. Anybody know? No volunteers? Her name is Martha Lane Fox. Now Baroness Martha Lane Fox. One of the few people who actually really did make it in the big boom that we had in 2000. Before the big bust in 2001. Martha Lane Fox got a company called lastminute.com, which many of you may have used. It's now worldwide. It does last minute holidays, hotels, blah blah blah. Right, she's been very successful. But she didn't invent the travel business. She didn't. There were plenty of other people doing tourism and so forth online. What she did was had a smart idea of dealing with the fact that most of us aren't that well planned. And what we really want is, okay, I need to do something now or next week. Let me have something fast, last minute. That worked. This guy? Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg. Yes, that is the face of Facebook. What can I say? Lovely in itself, yes. Student project. Allegedly created by the twins who've been suing him as often as they possibly can in every court they can find. But he was actually the software guy who was building basically a class book system so that students could talk to one another and share materials and so forth. It kind of got a bit bigger than that since then. Alright? Here you go. Do you know this one? Portuguesa. Portuguesa. Your most successful young entrepreneur in Portugal last year, Sergio Santos, created a company called Bundler. It's an online company which basically filters information from the web for you based around your interest to produce bundles of information. There you go. Successful entrepreneur. Again, not an idea that didn't exist. There have been harvesters. I remember when I first started in computing, we had a tool that harvested the internet before there was a thing called the web. Right? Veronica, she was called. Very nice. But what he's doing is innovating into that space. And the last guy here, any takers? That's Jeff Bezos, the guy who developed and runs Amazon. He's the world's 5th most richest man. And Jeff is a bookseller. In and of itself, not particularly startling until you look at the scale and the way that he did it and so forth. So, important point, all of these guys made shed loads of money, very successful, started companies that are surviving, have a worldwide endeavour, or Sergio we hope will, doing things that already existed. Not inventing something new, but taking what they already knew and looking at it perhaps from a different light or whatever. So the important thing to take from this is, first of all, there are no characteristics of age, gender, nationality, background, or anything that predispose to say that somebody should be creative or can't be creative, that predispose to say that they can or can't develop innovative products and services, or be an entrepreneur. In fact, the argument is we all are. We are all creative. By being human beings, by simply thinking about our lives, by the way that we go about things, we are constantly creating. We are constantly innovating. The major difference about entrepreneurs is that they develop their ideas, their vision, their passion, and it becomes the driving force of their lives. They put the time and effort in, and they take the huge risk. The biggest thing about entrepreneurial activity is risk, and it's the appetite to take that on. If you don't have an appetite to take the challenge, to take the risk, you won't take the step to start up on your own, or start up with friends. All of the people that we've looked at there developed their knowledge and skills through a combination of practical experience, combined it with professional education and professional advice. And particularly important to understand, every single one of those people, and alright, some of them are still young, have continued to learn throughout their lives and have come back and made the point that it is a continuous process, that it's not, I know what to do now and that's it. The growth of things like TED, the Innovators Networks, the Entrepreneurs Workshops, these are all based on the fact that what people have learned through entrepreneurship is the need to continue to learn, to continue to innovate, gain the experience and understanding of what's going on in the world. Which means that we need to have facilities and resources that support that educated model and that support the professionalism and the relationship between student life and the working life. These two things are not really separate in any sense. We take the view that lifelong learning is a process that we are all engaged in, and it is important that we actually create the facilities that bridge what we see as these boundaries. Okay. So what's the message? Why am I standing here saying this? Why are we doing this to students? The message is quite straightforward. Yes. If you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to take these things up, there's a process that we do know, that we have identified. To find an idea, not necessarily develop your own idea, right? Come up with something brand new, novel and exciting. I've had lots and lots of those brainstorming exercises where you come up with something brand new, novel and exciting, which was impossible to create. In fact, the interesting thing is that for the students on the course, if they don't have an idea, we have a link to a resource that's called 101 Good Ideas for Entrepreneurs. So you can get an idea and you can work on it. Identify a unique selling proposition in a market. Where are you going to sell? What is it that's going to make you special and different within that? A huge number of businesses start up simply by being the business in that place. There was one in this town, there isn't one in the next town. It's doing very well there. We'll start one over here. Thus do franchises and McDonald's become world dominating. Right? Develop a plan. And one of the key factors that you'll hear more about through the other presentations is the whole process about helping people to understand how you go about developing a business plan. Taking that idea and that selling proposition and getting it to a point where you can actually fund that and run it out. And that next element is key. Find funding. There's lots and lots of mythology that runs around the whole funding process, ranging from business angels who will give you money and then steal your heart and your soul, through to friendly bankers and other mythologies of that type. But one of the things that we will do in the course is actually talk people through the issues about how you go about that process, how you find that. And fundamental to that is about good planning. There are arguments, and I've heard them often about the people who wander in and throw millions of dollars at some half-baked project that nobody's properly thought out just because they think it's the next big thing. I'm waiting for this guy to come through the door. I'm telling you, I can hardly wait to meet him. Most of the guys I've got met who've got millions of dollars ain't keen to throw them at me. I don't know why. Develop your product service, yes. Once you've talked about it, do it. The big thing about the big bang and big boom and bust of the so-called software boom in the 2000s was the fact that people topped up services they couldn't provide. The vast majority of these companies went bust because they just couldn't do what they said they were going to do, or they did something not very well. And then sell, and the last bit which you're all familiar with, in order to achieve this, work all the hours God sent and a few you forgot about. And then work some more. Okay. The big thing about this is to make a difference. The gentleman's name is there. The key argument about what we're trying to do through the course that we're developing and the ideas that we have is twofold. One is about talking about entrepreneurship, about encouraging people to think about developing, creating new companies or developing the enterprises that they work in, pushing forward, becoming successful. Particularly within the IT sector in Europe, we have a problem. We have a significant shortage of skilled professionals. We need to do things to improve that. We need to have companies developing that are employing in this space, because as Europe becomes more and more expensive in terms of the manpower, we become less and less competitive in the base industries on a worldwide basis. But the other thing that we're doing, and Barry's already mentioned, is this is student-centered learning. We're really interested in developing a model that is associated with the student taking much more control of the process for themselves. So it's not a case of us just saying, here's a class, do what we tell you. Right? We know best because we are lecturers and therefore must be godlike in all our forms. You must believe everything we say. Not true. I'm anything but godlike, as you can tell. The key point is actually the engagement with the students in giving them the foundation of knowledge, the information, the basis on which to build, and then helping them to take that on board and develop themselves. The best thing I can ever do for a student is help them become a better learner, so that they can then go forward and use those skills in the future to develop themselves, and so forth. And this key point from Jobs. Steve Jobs is a really interesting character, much hated by many. He wasn't a technologist, he wasn't a coder, he's a designer. The designs that he created have become prevalent now in our society, as computing technology has moved away from being locked into what's in the box and how fast is the processor, and is beginning to look at how does this interact with your life. The Jobs argument, absolutely I agree with. Your time is limited. It's not a rehearsal. Take advantage of the opportunities and push on. And have the courage to take the risks. That's the hardest thing to do. Okay, thank you.